We'll start with a question. And this is a question for everyone in this room, no matter your age. Think of a story that you know super well. What is a story that you know like the back of your hand? Have you ever spent a lot of time studying the back of your hand? I've always thought that's a weird phrase. What is a story that you know beginning, middle, and end and could tell anyone at any time? It could be a story about your family. It could be a story that you know from a movie or a television show or a book, a character that you love. It could be a really long and winding story, or it could be something really short. I know that in some of our families, and it was true of me, my family thought I knew how to read a lot earlier than I did because I knew all the words to the books that we were reading. And I knew which words went on which pages. It wasn't because I was reading, it was because I just knew those stories so well. You have something in mind, a story that you could tell? Okay. So, you have your story in mind. Do you know the story of Joseph? Does that ring a bell? We might have talked about him a little bit in the past couple of weeks, because his story is actually the biggest and longest story in the Torah. His story gets the most space, the most columns. You may know that story from religious school. You might know that story from a sermon, or maybe from Torah study. Maybe your connection to the Joseph story is through the great Andrew Lloyd Webber. That was my first connection to the Joseph story, and when I don't remember what order things go in, I just sing it in my head. A lot of us know this story. His story actually is over now in Torah, and that's why I bring it up, because there's a very strange line at the beginning of this week's Torah portion. It says, Vayakom melech chadash al Mizraim, asher lo yada et Yosef, which means there arose a new king over Egypt, a new Pharaoh, who did not know Joseph. Now, a quick review of Joseph's story, in case you've forgotten, sans singing and dance moves, my apologies. Joseph becomes very important in Egypt, right? Joseph has these dreams that seem to come true, and the Pharaoh brings Joseph into his house. This is a very, very brief retelling, lots missing, but Joseph becomes the right-hand man to Pharaoh. Joseph helps Egypt make it through a famine. It's actually very smart. He's got some agricultural knowledge, some economic knowledge, and he helps make sure that all of Egypt survives famine. Now, this is generations later, that's true, but don't you think that someone who was so important, someone who helped an entire nation make it through hard times, don't you think that his name might be written down somewhere? If you're going to become Pharaoh, you have to learn the history, and therefore you know Joseph? It seems very odd to me that Pharaoh, this new Pharaoh, has no idea about that story. Now, we could argue about what that line really means, but let's take it at face value for the moment. How is it that Pharaoh came to not know Joseph? Let's go back to what we started with. What's a story that you know beginning, middle, and end, and you could tell to someone else? Let's put aside the movies and the books, and let's take it personal. What is a family story? A story about yourself, a story about your parents or your grandparents, maybe a story about how your family came to this country, some of us more recently than others. Maybe a story about someone's favorite scarf or the family heirloom that sits on your shelf. Is there a story attached, and could you tell it? I'll tell you a quick one of mine. When I was in third grade, actually, I'm not making that up because there are third graders here, it really was third grade. I was at Sunday school, at religious school, and I asked my friends what they were doing for Ginheim. My friends looked at me like I was insane. What are you talking about? And I said, Ginheim, it's the Jewish holiday that falls between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. What do you guys do for Ginheim? I got blank stares. So, of course, when I went into my dad's car at pickup, I said, what is going on here? Nobody else celebrates Ginheim. Because in my family, the weekend between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we went over to my great-aunt Trudel's house. We all gathered. If I'd really thought about it, I would have had questions. We didn't say any prayers. We didn't light any candles. We just ate and spent time together. And if I waited, I really would have figured it out, because eventually, after great-aunt Trudel died, Ginheim spontaneously moved to February, and now it's in the summer. It turns out Ginheim is not a holiday at all. Ginheim is a lake town in Germany, and it's where my family would gather on the weekend between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and have a picnic together. And when the three sisters, Lata, my great-grandmother, who I never had the opportunity to meet, and my two great-aunts, Erna and Trudel, when they all came to the United States, they wanted to continue Ginheim. There was no Ginheim, so we did it in Trudel's house. That's the family story that I hold. And in fact, I have family members who've been back and visited since, and I even have a picture of the road sign that says Ginheim so many kilometers that way, and it's in my apartment. What's your version of that story? Because here's the thing. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. That means not enough people were telling Joseph's story. When we don't tell our stories, we forget. When we don't tell our Jewish story, both to ourselves and to others. Yes, we tell the stories about the harder times and the more difficult pieces, but we also tell the stories of joy and hope and excitement. It's only when we share stories, not just carry them around in our heads, but actually share them out loud. That's when we make a difference. That's when our stories are remembered. So this week, I have a job for you kids. If you're a kid, or a kid at heart, I want you to ask somebody about a story. Ask a question. And tell your story. And we will keep carrying those stories together so that we'll never again have a scenario where we are not remembered. When we tell our stories, they become indestructible. Let's do that together. Shabbat Shalom.